welcome to the Big Bang. In today's programme, we've got lots of strange things. We'll be showing you how to make Big Bang useless goo.
I shall be explaining how this mysterious and beautiful light works and how to make one for yourself.
And we've got the strange but true story of how rubber bounced back.
But first, a trick. Kate, I bet you didn't know I'm a top detective, did you?
Oh, this is another of your very well-hidden talents, is it, Gareth?
Hidden talents, yes. I'm going to solve one of the great unsolved crimes of all time. Which hand made the Queen dizzy?
What are you on about?
I have two 50p's here, each with a picture of Her Madge on there. Now, I want you to take one in each hand, and I want you to whirl one of them round, not yet, until the Queen is completely dizzy, but only one of them. And don't tell me which hand you did it with, and to prove there's no cheating, I will wear a blindfold, and I will tell you quite correctly which hand made the Queen dizzy. Ready?
OK.
Make that girl dizzy. Go on, she's got to be really dizzy. Go
It's
on.
quite hard work, this, Gareth.
Oh, she's got to be able to fall
How
over,
long-
you know.
How long do I have to do it before she's dizzy?
Until her eyes are sort of giggling about a bit.
I think that's enough. Right,
Okay,
I'm finished.
right, hold your hands out in front of you. Don't tell me which one you used. That's it. Look, you can see, look, her eyes are all over the place. Her tiara's been knocked off. It was your right hand you used. Am I right?
You are? How did you know?
Well, I caught you red-handed. It's a trick, you see, because as you do that, all the blood gathers in the end of your arm, and this hand goes much redder than the other one, so I know which hand made the Queen dizzy.
Very clever, a good trick. Now, I've got a trick for you. Can you make light come out of one of these mints?
Oh, that's a hard one. Can I have some thinking time?
You can, and if you haven't got it, I'll show you how it works at the end of the programme.
Look at this beautiful lampshade. It's been turned by the heat from the lamp. They're actually really easy to make, and you can fit them on your bedside lamp. It's actually made in two pieces. Let me show you. You've got the box which contains the whole device. There's the lamp, and this is the bit which generates those patterns. See this fan on top? It kind of works like a windmill. You start by making the fan. Take a piece of tracing paper and draw onto it a circle of about 200 millimetres in diameter. Then draw inside that a slightly smaller circle. And then draw an even smaller circle in the centre. Divide this circle into 12 equal segments, kind of like the face of a clock. Then cut along those lines up to the small circle in the centre, and you should have something which looks like this. Now, using double-sided sticky tape or glue, it doesn't really matter, take each of the blades of your fan and move them along and line them up with that smaller circle. Stick it down and repeat that process for all 12 blades, and you should have something that looks like that. Now, the next stage is to make the pattern generating part of your lampshade. And so for that, you need a piece of paper which is long enough to go right the way around your fan bit and a little bit more. And then cut into that the holes which are going to generate the patterns. I've got some dots down the outside and some fairly random shapes in the centre. So glue that to your fan piece, and you should have something which looks like this. Now, to create the box which your lampshade is going to fit into, you're going to need a fairly big box. Big enough, in fact, so you've got about 100 millimetres between the top of the box and the position of the bulb in your bedside lamp. This is so that you don't get too much heat building up inside and start scorching the materials. Now, the next stage is to suspend your fan and shade from the top of the box using a piece of cotton and a bead at the top just to lock it. And it needs to be about half the distance between the top of the box and the position of the bulb. And the final stage is to cover the holes, leaving the back one open so you can get your lamp in and out. And it's a good tip to make a couple of holes in the top of the box to let some of the heat out as well. And I think this is easily one of the most beautiful things I've ever made.
Today we're going to be looking at the stuff they used to make balls like this. It's one of the most useful and popular materials ever discovered. It's tough, it's waterproof, and it's very flexible.
It was first discovered several hundred years ago by people who live in South and Central America. They fashioned it not only into bouncy balls, but into bottles and boots as well. There you are.
But although it was interesting and fun, it wasn't very practical because after a couple of years, anything made from this stuff just fell to pieces.
So, may the Big Bang present the strange but true story of how rubber bounced back. Get after it.
Now, rubber is a natural material. It comes from the sap of a tree, and it was during the 19th century that it became really popular. They used it to make all kinds of things. They made rubber dentures. They printed certificates on it. And even this ornate shoe is actually made of rubber.
Useless!
But there was a problem. In cold weather, it became really hard, and in hot summers, it got soft and sticky, and eventually, it just fell apart altogether.
Hopeless! At this time, there lived an American called Charles Goodyear, whose whole life was dominated by one thought: how to solve the problem of perishing rubber.
One day, Charles Goodyear saw a rubber life jacket in a shop window. He thought he could make a better valve for the jacket, but the salesman said it would be a waste of time because the rubber wouldn't last anyway. And if anyone could come up with a way of preserving rubber, his company would pay almost anything. Goodyear was a man with a mission. He had no training, no equipment, and no money, but he started to experiment, mixing the rubber with other stuff to make rubber compounds. Unfortunately, nothing worked, and his new rubber materials were just a mess.
People laughed at him. They called him a crank. But Goodyear didn't give up. And in 1839, he finally got the break that he so richly deserved. He tried adding the chemical sulphur to one of his rubber compounds, but that didn't work either. But then he accidentally dropped some of that rubber onto the fire. When Goodyear removed that bit of rubber from the fire and allowed it to cool, he couldn't believe what he'd found. Instead of melting, the rubber had charred like leather, and between the burnt bit of material and the rest of the stuff, there was a very thin layer which looked and felt exactly right.
It was an amazing chance discovery.
Yippee!
He had solved the rubber problem. If you look at rubber under a powerful microscope, what you see is hundreds of incredibly small, long threads. And it's those threads that makes rubber so flexible. But as you stretch it, it gradually falls apart. What Goodyear had found was that if you heat the rubber with sulphur, then the sulphur helps those bits of string stay together. So it's still flexible, but it doesn't fall apart.
Goodyear's metallic gum elastic was later known as vulcanized rubber, named after Vulcan. No, not the planet Mr. Spock comes from, but the god of fire. It was rubber, Jim, but not as we know it.
Although Goodyear's invention made millions of dollars, he never lived to see it, and he died still owing money. Gareth?
Come in! Although after his death, Goodyear's achievements were finally recognised, and vulcanised rubber is still in use today, although now there are lots of different types of rubber compounds.
And if it hadn't have been for Goodyear's determination, he'd have never solved the problem of perishing rubber. And that's the story of how rubber bounced back.
fascination with all things bouncy doesn't end with Mr. Goodyear. Because about 50 years ago, in America, a chap was working for a big company who were looking for a replacement for Mr. Goodyear's vulcanised rubber. They wanted to use it for car tyres. And this is what they came up with. A nice, bouncy substance, just like rubber.
But when they put it down and left it, it began to droop and eventually just became a big puddle. And not very practical for car tyres, as you can imagine. But what they'd discovered was seriously weird stuff. You see, most materials that you can bounce, stretch or squeeze spring back into shape. They're elastic.
On the other hand, materials like clay, which go splat when you drop them, stay splatted, are called viscous. Splat.
Bounce, bounce.
Splat.
But this stuff breaks all the rules. You drop it and it bounces, but if you splat it, it stays splatted.
And what's even weirder is that if you stretch it, it goes into huge, long strands.
The problem is, it's absolutely useless.
It lay around in the factory for 6 years until someone realised that it didn't matter that it was useless. It was actually good fun. And good fun always sells.
Someone put it into little plastic eggs, called it silly putty, and it sold like silly stuff in plastic eggs. They made lots of money.
A tribute to all things completely useless. And for some reason, I find myself strangely attracted to this stuff.
So here is our recipe for Big Bang useless goo. You're going to have to buy some stuff, some borax crystals. You can get those from the local chemist.
And you'll also need some of this stuff, white PVA glue. All you do is empty it into a mixing bowl, but not before you've got the permission of the person who owns the bowl.
Dissolve a teaspoon of the borax crystals into a glass of water and then, teaspoon at a time, add it to
Mixture.
your glue. Now, keep stirring. You have to keep stirring it, and it should start to come together. Now, when it has, you then take it out of there and knead it until it's not sticky anymore. And what you should end up with is something like this. Now, it depends how much borax solution you add as to what it's like, but you can get it bouncy, or you can get it all jelly-like. So, Gareth, how's the new batch going?
Nearly there, nearly there. Just got to squeeze off a couple of last drops of fluid, and there it is. Big Bang useless goo. The end of the show is almost here, but first we have to resolve this getting light out of a mint trick of yours. I've been giving this some thought, Kate, and I reckon using the USS Enterprise's warp core, if we can remodulate the frequency of the mint sample of the plasma injectors...
All you need to get light out of a mint is someone else's teeth.
Are you kidding?
No, when you crunch down on something, you're putting energy into it. And one of the chemicals inside mints then releases that energy again as light. It's very, very dim, but sometimes you can just see it.
Really?
Yeah, go and shut the blinds and I'll show you. I'm going to use a coffee grinder instead because it should be easier to see with this.
Oh, me foot!
What are you doing?
Nothing, I'm just trying to... Sorry!
Gareth, now watch this.
Watch what?
Did you see it?
I can't see anything!
Well, it does work, but you have to sit for about an hour in a very dark room to get your eyes sensitive enough to see the tiny flash of light.
Oh, right. Ow!
Well, that's all the trickery for today's Big Bang.
We'll see you next time. I hope. Sorry!